A werewolf romance written by Georgina Anderson. Prologue. I was 8 years old when my father took me into the woods to kill me. Not quickly, not with mercy, but slowly, deliberately, leaving me to the forest's judgment because the pack seer had named me heir to the shattered queen, the woman whose madness had once stolen every song, every emotion, every spark of life from our people for an entire season. They called it the Great Stillness. 100 years had passed, but the terror remained, carved into our bones like ancient scars. And on my 8th birthday, when my empathy reached out like it always did and I felt the symphony of their collective fear, deafening, suffocating, absolute, my father made his choice. He wept as he did it. He quoted the old texts as he led me deeper into the darkness. Better one soul lost than the silence of all. I remember the exact moment he stopped walking, the exact moment he turned his back, the exact moment I realized that to my own pack, to my own blood, I was not a child. I was a threat that needed to be erased. They left me there to die. But the forest had other plans, and so did the goddess sleeping inside my soul. Part 1. The Day They Chose Fear. The morning of my 8th birthday, I woke up knowing something terrible was going to happen. I can't explain how I knew. That's the thing about being what I am, what I was even then, though I had no name for it yet. I felt things, not just my own emotions, but everyone else's too. The happiness that bubbled up in my mother's chest when she made honey cakes, even though her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. The shame that sat like a stone in my father's gut every time he looked at me. The sharp, metallic taste of fear that radiated from every pack member whenever I walked by. That morning, the fear was different. It wasn't the usual background hum I'd learned to live with, like the constant buzz of insects in summer. This was a roar, a tidal wave. It pressed against my skull until I thought my head would split open. I stayed in bed longer than I should have, curled into myself, trying to remember the meditation techniques Elder Mira had taught me. Picture a wall, little one. Picture a wall between you and them. But the wall wouldn't come. The fear was too loud, too hungry, too certain. When I finally came downstairs, my mother was in the kitchen, and the honey cakes sat untouched on the table. She didn't look at me. That should have been my first real warning. My mother always looked at me, even when it hurt her to do so. Even when I could feel the love and terror warring inside her chest like two wolves fighting over the same kill. "Mama?" My voice was small, 8 years old, and I already knew how to make myself smaller, quieter, less. "Eat quickly, Iris." Her voice cracked on my name. "Your father wants to take you into the Weald today. A birthday tradition." There was no tradition. We both knew it. But I nodded anyway, because even at 8, I understood that sometimes lies were the only kindness we had left to give each other. I ate one honey cake. It tasted like ash and goodbye. My father was waiting by the eastern gate, the one that led into the deep forest we called the Weald, the place where disobedient pups were threatened they'd be sent, where rogues disappeared and never returned, where the old magic still lived in the roots and stones. He wore his ceremonial leathers, the ones marked with the ancient symbols of our pack's founding. His face was carved from granite, but his emotions were chaos. Grief, duty, terror, and underneath it all, a love so profound and so poisoned that it made me want to vomit. "Come, Iris." He didn't offer his hand. He hadn't touched me in months, not since the seer's proclamation. I followed him into the trees. For the first hour we walked in silence. I tried to catalog the sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a hawk, the whisper of wind through pine needles. anything to drown out the deafening emotional symphony coming from my father. But with every step deeper into the Weald, his resolve hardened. His fear calcified into something colder, something final. He was going to leave me here. I knew it with the same certainty I knew my own name. "Papa?" I tried, my voice barely audible. He flinched, actually flinched, as if my voice had struck him physically. "The seer spoke to me again last night," he said finally, his voice rough as gravel. "She had another vision. The same one she's had since you were born. The shattered queen. The great stillness. The end of all song. I'd heard the story 1,000 times, how a century ago, a girl like me, a vessel, they called her, had been born with the ability to hear and manipulate the emotional resonance of all living things. How she'd been isolated, feared, driven slowly mad by her own gift until one day she'd simply shattered. And when she broke, she took everything with her. For 6 months, our territory had been a wasteland of emptiness. No joy, no sorrow, no rage, no love. Just hollow wolves walking through a hollow world, unable to feel, unable to connect, barely able to survive. They said pack members had stood and stared at their own children without recognition. They said mates had lain beside each other as strangers. They said the only thing that had saved them was when the alpha of that time had finally, mercifully, ended the vessel's life. "The seer says you're stronger than the shattered queen was," my father continued, and I could hear him fighting to keep his voice steady. "That means when you break, not if, Iris, but when, the stillness will be worse. It could spread beyond our territory. It could consume everything." "I won't break," I whispered, but even I didn't believe it. How could I, when everyone around me was so certain I would? He stopped walking. We were deep in the Weald now, far beyond where even the hunting parties ventured. The trees here were ancient, their trunks wider than 3 wolves standing side by side, their branches forming a canopy so thick that the forest floor existed in permanent twilight. My father turned to face me, and for the first time in months, he really looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard. In his emotional landscape, I felt the precise moment his heart broke. "I love you," he said, and it was the most devastating thing he could have said because it was true. Absolutely, irrevocably true. "I love you more than my own life, but I love them too. Your mother, your future siblings, the 347 souls of our pack. And I will not, let history repeat itself." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Dried meat, a water skin, a flint. Enough to survive for maybe 3 days if I was careful. If I was lucky. "Better one soul lost than the silence of all," he quoted, and his voice finally broke. "That's what the texts say. That's what every alpha since the Shattered Queen has sworn to uphold. If a vessel is born, and the risk is too great..." He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. "You're leaving me here to die." I said it flatly, without accusation, because what was the point? I could feel that he believed he had no choice, that in his mind, this was mercy, that a quick death by his own hand would have been kinder, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. So instead, he'd let the forest be his executioner. "The Weald will judge you fairly," he said, and I think he actually believed it. "If you are truly cursed, it will claim you. If you are not, if the seer was wrong..." But he couldn't finish that thought either, because we both knew the seer was never wrong. He set the bundle down at my feet. Then he did something that surprised me. He knelt, bringing himself to my eye level, and for just a moment, he let me see all of him. The father who had sung me lullabies before the seer's vision. The man who had taught me to track deer and identify healing herbs. The alpha who carried the weight of 347 lives on his shoulders and had decided mine could not be one of them. "The silence you bring will be a blessing," he said, and it was both a prayer and a curse. "May the moon receive you gently, little one." Then he stood, turned his back, and walked away. I stood there for a long time, listening to his footsteps fade into nothing, feeling the thread of his anguish stretch thinner and thinner until finally, mercifully, it snapped. He was too far away. I couldn't feel him anymore. For the first time in my entire life, I was truly alone. And that's when I started screaming. Part 2. The Forest's Answer. I don't know how long I screamed. Long enough that my throat turned raw, that my voice cracked and failed, that the sound devolved from words into pure animal anguish. I screamed for my father who had abandoned me, for my mother who had let him, for the pack that had decided I was better off dead, for the little girl I'd been that morning, who'd eaten honey cakes and still believed she might be loved more than she was feared. But mostly, I screamed, because for the first time in 8 years, there was no one close enough for me to feel. No emotions bleeding into mine, no fear or hatred, or disgust, or pity crashing against my walls. Just my own rage and terror and heartbreak, and it was so much. Too much. More than my small body could possibly contain. I collapsed to my knees in the dirt, tears and snot streaming down my face, and something inside me cracked wide open. The forest answered. It started as a whisper, not a sound, but a feeling, a gentle pressure against my consciousness, like a hand reaching through dark water. Then it grew. The ancient oak to my left radiated a deep, patient contentment. The moss-covered stones sang of cool stability. A family of rabbits in a nearby warren hummed with warm, sleepy satisfaction. Even the earthworms in the soil beneath me pulsed with simple, mindless purpose. Everything was alive. Everything was singing. And unlike the chaotic, often painful symphony of pack emotions, this was beautiful. The forest didn't fear me. It didn't judge me. It simply existed, each living thing contributing its small voice to an impossibly complex harmony that had been playing since long before I was born and would continue long after I was gone. I gasped, and the crack inside me opened wider, not breaking, transforming. For the first time, I reached back, not to push the emotions away, not to build walls against them, but to listen. Really listen. The oak tree showed me decades of growth, of seasons cycling, of storms weathered and sunlight cherished. The rabbits shared their simple joys, the sweetness of clover, the safety of the warren, the warmth of nestled bodies. Even the insects, the birds, the very fungi breaking down a fallen log into rich soil. They all had songs, and they were all willing to let me hear them. I was still crying, but the tears had changed. This wasn't grief anymore. This was awe. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I remember the dreams. I dreamed of walking through a forest made of moonlight, my feet bare against silver grass. I dreamed of a voice that was ancient and vast and patient, though it spoke no words. I dreamed of a presence that had been waiting for a very, very long time. When I woke, it was dawn. I was curled against the roots of the ancient oak, and every muscle in my body ached. But I was alive. More than alive. I was awake in a way I'd never been before. And there, half buried in the moss not 3 feet from where I lay, something gleamed in the early morning light. I crawled over to it, my fingers digging into the soft earth, and pulled it free. It was a stone, but not just any stone. It was perfectly smooth, the size of my palm, and it glowed with a soft internal light the color of the full moon. The moment my skin touched it, warmth flooded through me. Not the feverish heat of sickness, but the gentle warmth of recognition. The stone pulsed in my hand, its rhythm matching my heartbeat. And underneath my heartbeat I felt another rhythm. Slower, deeper, infinitely patient. The voice that filled my mind wasn't words. It was knowing. It was inevitability. The vessel is ready. The balance wanes. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt a strange, inexplicable sense of coming home. The next 3 years in the Weald were the strangest education anyone could imagine. I learned to hunt, not from necessity alone, but from the deer themselves, their patterns, their instincts, their relationship with the forest ecosystem. I learned which plants healed and which killed by feeling their essential nature, the song of their purpose. I learned to predict weather by listening to the collective anxiety of animal communities before a storm. I learned to find water by following the contentment of the moss and ferns. But more than that, I learned about her. Ileana. That wasn't a name so much as an identity, the moon's first voice, the primordial spirit that had existed since before wolves walked upright, since before the first pack claimed the first territory. She'd been present for everything, witnessing the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of magic itself. And for reasons I didn't yet understand, she'd been waiting in this forest for someone who could hear her. For someone like me. She didn't speak often, and when she did, it was rarely in anything resembling language. Instead, she'd guide my instincts. A sudden, inexplicable urge to climb a certain tree seconds before a wild boar charged through the underbrush below. A dream of a hidden spring that led me to fresh water during a drought. A gut-deep certainty that I needed to move my shelter the night before a massive oak branch crashed down exactly where I'd been sleeping. The Moonstone, my name for it, though I suspected she had other, older names, remained my constant companion. It had begun to do strange things. Sometimes it would glow brighter when I was in danger. Other times it would hum with a frequency that made my bones vibrate, always before something important was about to happen. I was 11 years old, sitting by my small fire and roasting a rabbit I'd caught, when the Moonstone's hum became almost painful. The entire forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the insects went quiet. Something was wrong. Something was coming. I grabbed my makeshift spear, a sharpened branch, hardly a weapon, but better than nothing, and melted into the shadows beneath a massive pine. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, to listen. At first I heard nothing. Then, footsteps. Heavy. Male, moving with purpose but also with pain. I could feel him before I saw him, and what I felt made my breath catch. Agony. Physical and emotional, all twisted together into a knot of suffering so intense it made my eyes water. But underneath that, there was something else. Something I'd never encountered before, not in all my years with the pack, or my years alone in the Weald. Silence. Not the absence of feeling. This man was a storm of pain and determination, and carefully controlled rage. But there was a core to him, a center that my empathy couldn't touch. It was like trying to hear a sound that existed just beyond the range of my perception. Present, but unreachable. He stumbled into the small clearing near my fire, and I finally saw him. He was massive, easily 6.5 feet of solid muscle, probably in his mid-20s. His dark hair was matted with blood from a wound on his temple. His clothes, travel-worn but well-made, were torn and stained. His left arm hung at an odd angle, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they held the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting battles on every front, internal and external, with no hope of rest. He swayed, caught himself against a tree, and then his gaze locked onto me. Most people, when they first feel my empathy touch them, react with confusion or discomfort. This man's reaction was instant and visceral. His eyes widened, and for just a moment I felt his shock crack through that inexplicable silence around his core. "You," he breathed, and he sounded like a man who'd been searching for something his entire life and had just found it. "You're the—" But he didn't finish. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. I should have run. He was clearly dangerous. Those weren't hunting injuries. Those were battle wounds. He could be a rogue, a criminal, someone fleeing justice. My father's warnings about trusting strangers echoed in my mind, but the moonstone in my pocket had gone absolutely wild, thrumming with an urgency that bordered on desperate. And when I reached out with my empathy, carefully testing the edges of his consciousness, I felt no malice. Just pain and exhaustion, and that maddening, impossible silence at his core that called to something deep in my own soul. Eliana's presence surged in my mind, and for the first time in 3 years, she came close to actual words. Important. This one matters. So instead of running, I dragged the unconscious stranger to my shelter. Part 3. The Anchor. He woke with a knife at my throat. One moment I was checking the bandage on his head wound, and the next I was pinned against the earthen wall of my shelter, cold steel pressing against my jugular, his storm cloud eyes boring into mine with lethal focus. "Who are you?" His voice was a growl. "What pack? Who sent you?" I didn't move, didn't breathe, just let my empathy spread out gently, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. His emotions were locked down tight, military-grade control, but I could feel the edges. Paranoia, hypervigilance, the kind of deep-seated trauma that comes from betrayal, from being hunted. "No one sent me?" I said quietly. "You collapsed in my clearing. You were dying. I helped you. Why?" The knife didn't waver, but I felt his confusion spike. "You don't know me. I could be anyone. I could be—" He stopped, and I watched recognition flash across his face. "You're reading me. Right now. I can feel it." Most people couldn't. Most people just felt vaguely uncomfortable and couldn't explain why. But he knew exactly what I was doing, which meant he'd encountered an empath before. "I didn't mean to," I said, and it was true. By now, reaching out with my gift was as automatic as breathing. "I'll stop if you want me to, but you should know, if I wanted you dead, I could have let the forest take you, or the fever, or the infection that was already setting into your arm." He stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, the knife lowered. He didn't put it away, but he wasn't actively threatening me anymore. How long was I out? 2 days, he swore. "My patrol, they'll think—" He tried to stand, made it about halfway up, and promptly collapsed back against the wall with a grunt of pain. "Your patrol left you," I said flatly. I'd felt their emotions in the distance that first night, a hunting party moving away from our position. They'd been afraid. They felt the rogue pack's scouts and ran. They left you behind, to die. His face went carefully blank, but I felt the spike of betrayal, quickly suppressed. You don't know that. I know exactly that. I sat back on my heels, studying him. You're the inconvenient one, aren't you? The one who asks too many questions, challenges too many orders. They were looking for an excuse, and the rogues gave them one. For the first time, his control cracked completely. How could you possibly... You can't just... He ran his good hand through his matted hair, wincing at the movement. What are you? Iris, I said simply. My name is Iris. And I'm the child the Stoneclaw pack left in these woods to die 3 years ago, because they were afraid I'd break the world. I don't know what I expected. Shock, pity, maybe fear. What I got was a bark of laughter that sounded more like a sob. Stoneclaw? Of course. He closed his eyes. They're always the ones clinging to the old fears, the old ways. My name is Stannis, and I was the son of the Iron Moon Alpha. Third son, which meant expendable. Which meant when I started questioning why we were raiding peaceful settlements, why we were hoarding resources instead of trading, why every decision seemed designed to consolidate my father's power rather than protect our people. He trailed off. I'm what happens when an idealist is born into a tyrant's bloodline. We sat in silence for a moment, two outcasts recognizing each other. The silence, I said finally. At your core. I can feel everything else about you, but there's this void. Not empty, just unreachable. I've never encountered anything like it. Stannis's expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. My mother, he said quietly. She was like you. An empath. Powerful enough that my father saw her as a tool. A way to read his enemies, his rivals. She used what little power she had to make sure I'd be protected. Before she died, she bound something to my soul. A shield. She said it would keep empaths like her, like you, from being able to fully read me. She said it might save my life someday. His voice roughened. She was the only person who ever tried to save me instead of use me. And there it was. The reason Aliana had urged me not to run. The reason the Moonstone had gone wild. This man, this exile, this warrior philosopher with his dead mother's protection wrapped around his soul. He wasn't just important. He was the first person I'd ever met whose emotions didn't drown me. He was quiet. Part 4. The truth in his eyes. Stannis stayed for a week, then 2, then a month. At first it was necessity. His arm was broken, his ribs cracked, and infection had indeed been setting into the head wound. But as he healed, as I taught him to hear the forest's songs the way I did, as we fell into the easy rhythm of survival together, it became something else. It became a choice. Tell me about the Shattered Queen, he said one night as we sat by the fire, 3 months after he'd stumbled into my clearing. Your pack, they feared you'd become like her. But I've been watching you, Iris. You're not breaking. You're not even close. So what really happened to her? I'd been wondering when he'd ask. Stannis had a scholar's mind trapped in a warrior's body. Always probing, always questioning. It was one of the things I'd come to love about him, though I hadn't quite admitted to myself yet that I loved him. The texts say she went mad, I said, poking at the fire with a stick. That she heard too much, felt too much, and eventually the weight of all those emotions crushed her mind. When she shattered, she took everyone with her. The great stillness, 6 months where no one in Stoneclaw territory could feel anything at all. That's what the texts say. Stannis leaned forward, firelight dancing across his sharp features. But I've read other accounts, Iris. Ones your pack probably destroyed. I've spent years in archives and libraries collecting forbidden histories because I knew. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I knew that the version of history those in power tell is rarely the whole truth. My heart started to pound. What did you find? The Shattered Queen. Her name was Moira. She was 14 when they identified her as a vessel. Do you know what they did to her? I shook my head, unable to speak. They isolated her, completely. No contact with other wolves her age, no friends, no pack bonds. They were afraid she'd become too powerful if she learned to channel her empathy through connection, so they kept her alone. For years. They brought her out only when the Alpha needed her to read a prisoner, to detect lies, to break someone's will. They used her like a tool and gave her nothing in return. The fire crackled between us. My hands had started to shake. She didn't go mad randomly, Stannis continued, his voice gentle but unrelenting. She went mad because they made her a prisoner in her own pack, because they gave her no anchor, no outlet, no way to process the thousands of emotions she absorbed every time they forced her to use her gift. And when she finally broke, when the weight of all that pain and isolation became too much, yes, she unleashed the stillness. But Iris... He reached across the fire and took my hand. The accounts I found describe what happened in the months before Moira shattered. Crops failing, livestock dying, children born listless and weak. The pack dismissed it as bad luck, as a harsh season. But it wasn't. What was it? I whispered, though part of me already knew. The balance was already breaking. Moira wasn't just an empath. She was a vessel for something older, something that maintains the connection between all living things in a territory. When they isolated her, when they prevented her from fulfilling her purpose, the land itself started to sicken. The stillness wasn't Moira's curse. It was the symptom of a world trying to survive without its songkeeper. The moonstone in my pocket burned hot against my thigh. Eliana's presence surged in my mind, no longer a whisper, but a roar. Yes, truth. Finally, truth. That's why they're afraid of me, I said numbly. Not because I might cause the stillness, because without me, it's already starting again. Stannis' grip on my hand tightened. Iris, I didn't tell you this before because I didn't want to scare you, but I need you to understand. Your pack, Stoneclaw territory, it's dying. The hunting has been poor for years. The birth rate is dropping. There's a hollowness to everything. I felt it when my patrol passed through last season. I thought it was just the usual Stoneclaw grimness, but now I understand. They removed their vessel, and the land is screaming for her return. I pulled my hand away, standing abruptly. No, that can't be. If they're dying because of me, because they rejected me, then I'm still the curse. You're not a curse. Stannis stood too, and for the first time since I'd met him, his control shattered completely. You're a sanctuary. You're a bridge between worlds. You're what keeps the music playing, Iris. And they threw you away because they were too afraid to understand what you really are. And what am I? The question came out as a sob. Because I don't know. This voice in my head, this presence, she's getting stronger every day. Eliana, she wants something from me. She keeps saying the balance wanes, that we need to become one. But I don't know what that means, and I'm so scared that the moonstone exploded with light. Not metaphorically. Actual blinding white light that flooded the entire clearing, that made both of us throw up our hands to shield our eyes. I felt Eliana rise up inside me, vast and ancient and absolutely done with being patient. Her voice, when it came, was clear enough that even Stannis could hear it, It rattled the trees and shook the earth and resonated in the very marrow of my bones. The silence gathers. We must become one. Then, as abruptly as it had come, the light vanished. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. Ileana was no longer a presence in my mind. She was in my chest, pressing against my ribcage, demanding to be acknowledged. Stannis knelt beside me, his hands on my shoulders. Iris? Iris, stay with me. What does she mean? The stillness, I managed. It's not just an absence of feeling. It's an entity, a hunger. It consumes songs, consumes connection. And Ileana, the moon's voice, she's the only thing that can stand against it. But she needs a body. I looked up at him, and I knew he could see the terror in my eyes. She needs me to let her in completely, to merge, and I don't know if I'll still be me when it's over. His arms came around me, and for the first time in 3 months, I let myself cry against someone who could hold me without drowning in my own emotions. His silence, his beautiful, blessed silence, was the only thing keeping me tethered. Then we figure it out, he said fiercely. Together. You're not doing this alone, Iris. You're not Moira. You have an anchor. Do I? I pulled back to look at him, and I needed to know. Why did you stay, Stannis? Really? You could have left weeks ago. You could have found a new pack, started over. Why are you still here? He cupped my face in his hands, and the look in his storm-cloud eyes was so intense it stole my breath. Because from the moment I heard your soul, he said simply, my world went quiet for the first time in my entire life. He kissed me then, and the moonstone's light blazed soft and silver around us, and I knew that whatever came next, whatever I had to become, I wouldn't face it alone. But first I had to go back. Part 5. The Return of the Ghost. The decision to return to Stoneclaw territory wasn't sudden. It was a slow, inevitable pull that grew stronger with each passing week. The moonstone pulsed with increasing urgency. Ileana's voice became a constant pressure in my mind, not painful, but insistent, like a hand pressed against a door that needed to open. And then there were the dreams. Every night, I dreamed of dying things. Withered crops rotting in fields. Pups born silent and still. Wolves staring at each other with hollow eyes, unable to remember why they'd once cared. The creeping edge of the silence, spreading like frost across everything I'd once called home. I have to go back, I told Stannis one morning, 6 months after he'd stumbled into my life. We were sitting by the stream where I'd learned to fish, where he'd taught me to fight with more than just instinct and desperation. Not for them, for the land itself, for the balance. He didn't try to talk me out of it. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He never treated me like I needed protection from my own choices. Then we go together. Stannis, they exiled you. Your own pack is probably dead or scattered by now. His voice was matter of fact, but I felt the old grief beneath it, carefully contained. My father's tyranny would have collapsed eventually. I'm not going back for them either. I'm going because you'll need someone to watch your back, and because... He reached for my hand. Because wherever you go, that's where I belong now. We left the Weald 3 days later, carrying everything we owned in 2 worn packs. I'd lived there for almost 4 years, and leaving felt like tearing away a piece of my soul. But the forest understood. As we walked toward its edge, I felt the ancient oak's patient blessing, the rabbit's soft farewell, the very earth's acknowledgement of purpose. This had always been temporary. A chrysalis, not a home. As we crossed into Stoneclaw territory, the wrongness hit me like a physical blow. The forest here was dying. Not dramatically. There were still leaves on the trees, still birds in the branches. But there was a listlessness to everything. A muted quality to the songs I'd learned to hear. A stream that should have rushed with spring melt barely trickled. Deer we passed were thin, their coats dull. Even the air tasted stale, like breath held too long. "How bad is it?" Stannis asked quietly. He couldn't feel what I felt, but he could see it written on my face. Worse than I thought. I knelt and pressed my palm to the earth. The soil's song was weak, confused, like an instrument slowly falling out of tune. It's not just the absence of a vessel. The silence is actively feeding here, growing stronger. We were 2 days from the pack's central compound when we encountered the first patrol. There were 5 of them, warriors I recognized from my childhood, though they'd aged badly in 4 years. Gaunt faces, hollowed eyes, the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting a war you can't see and don't understand. When they saw me, they stopped dead. "It's her," one of them whispered, and the fear that exploded from all 5 of them was so intense I had to physically brace myself against it. "The cursed one. She came back." "I came back to help," I said, keeping my voice level despite the way my heart hammered. "Your land is dying. You're dying. And I'm the only one who can... You're the reason we're dying." The lead warrior, Marcus, I remembered his name was Marcus, drew his sword with shaking hands. "The seer said your absence was the price of our survival, that things would get better once you were gone. But they've only gotten worse, and that means..." His voice cracked. "That means you're still cursing us somehow, even from a distance." I felt Stannis tense beside me, ready to fight, but I put a hand on his arm, stopping him. These warriors were terrified and desperate, operating on broken logic and older fears. Violence wouldn't help. Instead, I did something I'd never done intentionally, not to this degree. I dropped every wall, every shield I'd built over the years, and I let my empathy flood outward like a dam breaking. I showed them what I felt. The forest's fading song, the land's desperate hunger for connection, the wrongness spreading through their territory like a cancer, invisible but inexorable. And underneath it all, the thing I'd only recently learned to sense, the silence itself, a vast and patient hunger that fed on severed bonds, on isolation, on fear. All 5 warriors staggered. One fell to his knees. Marcus's sword clattered to the ground. What was... He couldn't finish, but I felt his worldview cracking like ice under pressure. "That's the truth," I said quietly. "Not the seer's prophecy, not your alpha's fears. The truth. I'm not your curse. The silence is, and every day I'm not here. Every day there's no vessel to maintain the balance. It grows stronger." "The seer," one of the other warriors started, "is afraid of what she doesn't understand." I cut him off. "Just like my father was. Just like all of you are. But fear doesn't change reality. Your pups are being born without the spark of life they should have. Your crops are failing. Your prey is fleeing. And you can either keep running from me, or you can let me try to fix this before there's nothing left to save." They didn't stop us. Didn't help us either. But they stepped aside and let us pass. And I felt the first hairline fractures forming in the pack's collective certainty. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The pack compound looked like a shadow of what I remembered. The great hall's paint was peeling. Gardens that should have been lush with early summer growth were sparse and struggling. And the wolves themselves, gods, they looked like ghosts. Moving through their routines with mechanical precision, expressions blank, emotions muted to almost nothing. The silence wasn't just coming. It was already here, feeding slowly, savoring its meal. Word of our arrival spread like wildfire. By the time we reached the compound's central square, there were over 100 pack members gathered, and their emotions were a chaotic storm. Fear. Yes, always fear. But also hope, desperation, confusion, and underneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion that came from suffering without understanding why. Then the crowd parted, and my father stepped forward. 4 years had carved him into someone I barely recognized. His hair had gone almost entirely gray. His face was gaunt, etched with lines of stress and grief so deep they looked like scars. But his eyes hadn't changed. They still held that terrible combination of love and fear that had defined every moment of my childhood. Iris. My name in his mouth sounded like a prayer and an accusation. You came back. Did you think I wouldn't? I took a step forward, and I felt, rather than saw Stannis move with me, a solid presence at my back. Did you think I'd let them all die just because you were too afraid to let me live? He flinched, but he didn't look away. The seer said... The seer was wrong. I said it clearly, loudly, so that every wolf in the square could hear. About me, about what I am, about what would happen if you cast me out. She saw the great stillness in her visions and assumed I would cause it, but she had it backwards. I don't bring the silence. I'm the only thing standing between you and it. Lies! The seer herself pushed through the crowd, ancient and hunched, her clouded eyes somehow still managing to bore into me with undiluted hatred. I have seen the truth for 70 years. You are the heir to the shattered queen. You are death and emptiness, and... I am a vessel, I interrupted, and for the first time, I said it without shame. A bridge between the physical world and the primordial forces that maintain balance. The shattered queen, Moira, she wasn't evil. She was isolated, broken, prevented from fulfilling her purpose until she couldn't hold anymore. And when she shattered, it wasn't her power that caused the stillness. It was her absence. Just like my absence has been killing you all for 4 years. Prove it, someone shouted from the crowd. So I did. I reached for the moonstone in my pocket, and the moment my fingers closed around it, Eliana surged forward with enough force to drive me to my knees. The stone blazed with silver light, and I felt the goddess's power flood through every nerve, every cell, amplified and focused by 4 years of training in the Weald, by months of learning to trust instead of fear my gift. I opened myself completely and let the song pour out. It wasn't music in any conventional sense. It was emotion made manifest, connection made visible. Every wolf in that square suddenly felt what I felt. The slow death of their land, yes, but also its desperate desire to heal. They felt the bonds between them, frayed and weakening, and they felt how those bonds could be restored. They felt the silence's hunger, vast and patient and terrifying, pressing at the edges of their awareness. And they felt me. Really felt me, perhaps for the first time. Not a curse or a monster or a prophecy, just a girl who'd been thrown away and had somehow survived, who'd learned to hear the world's songs, who was offering them one last chance at salvation. I held the song for as long as I could, pouring everything I had into it, showing them the truth with a clarity that no words could match. My body shook. My nose started to bleed. I tasted copper and felt my bones vibrate like they were trying to tear themselves apart. Then Stannis's hands were on my shoulders, his silent core cutting through the chaos, giving me something to anchor to. "Easy," he murmured. "Don't burn yourself out. They've seen enough." I let the song fade gradually, pulling it back like reeling in a net. The light from the moonstone dimmed. The square was absolutely silent except for the sound of weeping. Dozens of wolves openly crying, their emotional walls completely shattered by what they'd just experienced. My father stood frozen, tears streaming down his face, his expression one of absolute devastation. Because he'd felt it too. He'd felt what his choice had cost. Not just me, but everyone. He'd felt the slow death he'd condemned them all to in the name of preventing it. "Iris." His voice broke completely. "What have I done?" I looked at him. This man who'd sung me lullabies and taught me to track and then led me into the woods to die. And I felt nothing. No hatred. No forgiveness. Just a vast, tired sadness. "What you thought you had to," I said quietly. "What your fear told you was right. But Father?" I used the title deliberately, watching him flinch. "Intentions don't change consequences. You tried to save them by throwing me away. Instead, you've been killing them slowly for 4 years. So now the question is, will you let me try to fix this? Or will your fear win again?" He opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the seer let out a wail that was barely human. "No! I have seen the vision. You will destroy us all. The Shattered Queen. Enough." I turned to face her, and I let her see exactly what I was. Not just Iris. Not just a vessel, but Iris and Ileana. 2 souls already beginning to merge, power thrumming beneath my skin like a second heartbeat. Your vision showed you the stillness. You saw destruction and emptiness and the end of all song. You weren't wrong about that. But you were wrong about the cause. I raised the moonstone, and it pulsed with light that cast stark shadows across the square. The silence is real. It's coming. And the only way to stop it is for me to complete what Moira never could. To merge fully with Ileana. To become the songkeeper this territory desperately needs. That's what your vision showed you. Not me destroying the world, but me transforming to save it. "And if you fail," the seer spat, "if you break like Moira did, then you'll be no worse off than you already are," Stannis said coldly, speaking for the first time. "Your land is dying. Your people are dying. Iris is offering you hope, the only hope you have left. So you can either cling to your fear and prophecies, or you can trust that maybe, just maybe, you were wrong." The square erupted into arguments, debates, desperate pleas. Some wolves fell to their knees and begged me to save them. Others shouted that I should be driven out again, killed this time to make sure. The chaos built and built until... "Enough!" My father's alpha command rolled over the square like thunder, and every wolf fell silent. He looked old, broken, but his voice still carried the authority of his position. He looked at me for a long moment, and I felt the war raging inside him. Terror and hope and crushing guilt all twisted together. 4 years ago, I made a choice that I believed would save my pack, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the square. I have stood by that choice every day since. Even as I watched everything slowly fall apart, because I believed, I needed to believe, that I had done the right thing. But I can't deny what I just felt. what we all felt. He drew a shuddering breath. I was wrong. About you. About what you are. About what we needed to survive. He knelt then, this proud alpha in the dirt before his exiled daughter, and the sight of it sent shockwaves through the assembled pack. I cannot ask your forgiveness, he said, his voice thick with tears. I cannot undo what I've done. But I can give you what you need now. My authority. My support. My vow that this pack will never abandon you again. He raised his head, and his eyes were raw with anguish. Tell us what you need, Iris. Tell us how to help you save us. I looked at him, at the pack, at the dying land around us. I felt Eliana pressing closer, eager, urgent. I felt the silence gathering at the edges of my awareness, drawn by the concentration of emotions here like a predator scenting blood. And I felt Stannis's steady presence beside me, his silent core the only thing keeping me tethered to myself as I prepared to become something more. I need time, I said finally, and space, and one more thing. I looked at Stannis, and I knew what I was asking of him, what it would cost. I need an anchor, someone to call me back if I go too far, someone who can reach me even when I'm drowning in the goddess's power. No. My father stood abruptly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Iris, you can't. That kind of bond, if it fails, if you break, I'll die with her. Stannis said it simply, without hesitation, meeting my father's horrified gaze steadily. I know. I don't care. Where she goes, I go. I felt the weight of what he was offering. A soul bond, deep and permanent and utterly irreversible. If I failed, if I shattered the way Moira had, Stannis wouldn't survive it. He'd be torn apart by the backlash, his soul ripped to pieces by the same forces that destroyed me. You don't have to do this, I whispered, just for him. Stannis, you don't... Yes, I do. He took both my hands in his, and the world narrowed to just the two of us. From the moment I heard your soul, Iris, I knew I was meant to find you. Not to use you, not to save you, but to stand beside you. Whatever you're about to become, you won't face it alone. That's not negotiable. Before I could argue, before I could try to protect him from his own devotion, Ileana's voice rang clear in my mind, and this time I knew Stannis heard it too. The anchor offers himself freely. The balance accepts. Prepare yourself, vessel. The silence comes, and we must meet it as one. The moonstone in my hand exploded with light, and I felt the last barrier between Ileana and myself begin to dissolve. It was time. Part 6. The Merging. They gave us the sacred grove, the place where alphas were crowned and mates were bonded, and the most solemn pack rituals were performed. Ancient stones stood in a circle, worn smooth by centuries of moonlight and ceremony. The ground here still held a faint echo of old magic, though even it had faded over the years of imbalance. It would have to be enough. My father tried to speak to me before we began, but I shook my head. There was nothing left to say between us that would change anything. Instead, I let my mother approach. She'd been silent throughout the confrontation in the square, but now she came forward with tears streaming down her face. I should have fought for you, she whispered, pulling me into a desperate embrace. When he said he was going to take you into the Weald, I should have stopped him. I should have... You did what you thought you had to, I said, echoing the words I'd spoken to my father, but softer. Because unlike him, I could feel the difference in her. She hadn't been driven by duty or prophecy. She'd been trapped between two impossible choices, her daughter or her pack, and the guilt had been eating her alive ever since. I forgive you, Mama. I do. But I can't promise I'll survive what's coming, and I need you to accept that. She pulled back, searching my face. What's going to happen to you? I'm going to merge with a primordial goddess, bind my soul to a man I've known for 6 months, and try to hold back a force of entropy that's been feeding on this territory for 4 years, I said with dark humor. Honestly, the odds aren't great. Don't. Her hands tightened on my shoulders. Don't joke, please. You're my baby girl, and I'm not a girl anymore. I said it gently, but firmly. I haven't been for a long time. I'm whatever I need to be to fix this. I kissed her forehead. But thank you for loving me even when you were afraid of me. She left, sobbing, and I felt her grief like a physical weight. But I couldn't carry it with me into what came next. I had to let it go. The pack formed a circle around the grove, hundreds of wolves bearing witness. Some were still skeptical, still afraid, but most radiated a desperate hope that was almost harder to bear than hatred would have been. They were placing their survival on my shoulders, and I was 12 years old. Stannis stood at the center of the grove, beside the largest of the ancient stones. He'd stripped to the waist, as tradition demanded for soul bonding, and in the moonlight he looked like something carved from marble, strong and steady and absolutely certain. I walked to him slowly, feeling Eliana rising with every step. The moonstone around my neck had begun to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat, faster and faster as the moment approached. Last chance to run, I told him, trying to smile. Not a chance. He reached for my hands, though I should mention, I have no idea what I'm doing. I've read about soul bonding, but the practical application is somewhat outside my experience. Despite everything, I laughed. Follow my lead. And Stannis, when I start to lose myself, when Ileana's power is too much, when I forget who I am, call me back. Say my name. Remind me why I'm doing this. To save a world that doesn't deserve you, he said quietly. To save a world that needs me, I corrected. There's a difference. I released his hands and stepped back. The moonstone's light was blinding now, and I could feel Ileana's eagerness like a living thing inside my chest. She'd been waiting for this moment for so long. Waiting for a vessel strong enough, trained enough, desperate enough to complete the merger. Waiting for me. Ileana, I said aloud, and my voice echoed strangely in the grove. I'm ready. Show me what we need to do. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Knowledge flooded into my mind, not in words, but in pure understanding. I saw what needed to happen, step by step, and I saw the cost. Gods, the cost! I looked at Stannis. I need you to swear something. When this is done, if I survive, if I'm still me enough to matter, you have to promise you'll tell me if I go too far, if I start to lose my humanity in the power, if I become something that should be stopped. His jaw tightened. Iris! Promise me! The desperation in my voice made several wolves in the outer circle flinch. I've seen what happens to vessels who lose themselves in the merger. I've seen it in Ileana's memories. They become extensions of the divine power, nothing more. I can't. My breath hitched. I need to know that if I become a monster, someone will have the strength to end it. You won't become a monster, Stannis said fiercely. But yes, I promise. If you lose yourself completely, if there's nothing of Iris left. His voice broke. I'll do what needs to be done. It would kill him, too. We both knew it. A soul bond worked both ways. Thank you, I whispered. Then I closed my eyes, pressed my palm to the moonstone, and said the words Ileana had given me. Words in a language older than wolves, older than speech, the first sounds that ever meant anything in a world of chaos. The moonstone shattered. Not physically, it remained whole in my hand, but something inside it broke apart and rushed into me like a river breaching a dam. Ileana's full presence, no longer filtered, no longer held at a distance, slammed into my consciousness with enough force to drive me to my knees. I heard Stannis shout my name, felt him reach for me, but I couldn't respond. I was drowning in memories that weren't mine. I remembered the first wolves learning to walk upright, finding language, forming packs. I remembered the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth of magic, the slow corruption that had created things like the silence. I remembered being the moon itself, vast and patient and eternal, watching over a world that lived and died in the span of moments from my perspective. And I remembered every vessel who'd come before me, dozens of them, stretching back thousands of years. Most had failed. The merger was supposed to be a partnership, but without proper training, without an anchor, the human mind simply couldn't contain the divine consciousness. They'd either been consumed completely, becoming empty vessels for Ileana's power, or they'd shattered under the weight of trying to hold both identities at once. I won't fail, I thought desperately. I can't fail. They're depending on me. Ileana's response was as close to warmth as something so ancient could manage. I chose you because you are strong enough, but you cannot do this alone. Call your anchor. Let him share the burden. I reached out blindly, and Stannis' hands found mine. The moment our skin touched, I felt the soul bond snap into place like a puzzle piece finding its home. His silent core, his mother's final gift, became my sanctuary. The one place inside the merger where I could retreat, where I could remember my own name. Iris. His voice was steady despite the chaos. I'm here. I've got you. Tell me what you need. I gasped, feeling Ileana's power starting to reshape me from the inside out. Just don't let go. No matter what happens, don't let go. Never, he promised. The transformation began in earnest then. My bones felt like they were being unmade and remade. My senses expanded until I could hear the heartbeat of every wolf in the grove, feel the slow pulse of sap in the trees, sense the desperate whisper of the dying earth crying out for healing. The moonstone's light spread from my hands to my arms to my entire body, until I was incandescent, until I was more light than flesh. And through it all, Stannis held on. Every time I started to drift too far, every time Ileana's vast consciousness threatened to overwhelm my small, human sense of self, he pulled me back, sometimes with words, my name repeated like a prayer, sometimes with memories, the feel of his hands teaching me to fight, the sound of his laughter when I'd caught my first fish in the stream, the way he'd looked at me the first time. He'd said I was the quiet in his storm. The merger wasn't a replacement. It was a negotiation, a constant push and pull between divine power and human heart. Ileana wanted complete control, wanted to reshape me into a pure conduit. I fought to retain my memories, my personality, my love. We battled and bargained inside my own skull while my body convulsed and the pack watched in horrified awe. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, we reached an equilibrium. Not a perfect balance, that would never truly exist, but a working compromise. I would be the dominant consciousness, the one who made decisions, the one who lived in the day-to-day world. But Eliana's power would be fully accessible, her knowledge available, her perspective always present. I opened my eyes, and the world had changed. No, I had changed. I could see in spectrums that didn't exist before. I could hear the music of growing things, of living souls, of the very earth's slow breath. I could feel the connections between every living thing in my territory, see them as glowing threads that wove together into an impossibly complex tapestry. And I could see the silence. It was visible to me now, not as an absence, but as a presence. A vast, hungry void pressing at the edges of Stoneclaw territory, slowly devouring the fraying threads of connection. It had been feeding here for 4 years, growing fat on isolation and fear and severed bonds. And it was so much worse than I'd imagined. "Iris?" Stannis's voice brought me back. He was staring at me with wonder and concern in equal measure. Are you still you?" I looked at him, really looked, with my new senses, and what I saw made my heart ache. His soul was beautiful, a steady silver flame that burned without consuming, without demanding. And now it was bound to mine, our threads woven so tightly together that separating them would destroy us both. "I'm still me," I said, and my voice came out strange, layered, as if 2 people were speaking in harmony. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I'm still me, but I'm also more Iris Eliana, a new thing." "Your eyes," he said softly. "They're silver, like moonlight." I hadn't noticed. I probably looked like a stranger to myself now, but there was no time to dwell on it. Because as I stood there, feeling my way into this new existence, I felt the silence suddenly notice me. It had been a passive predator, slowly consuming what was already dying. But now it sensed an active threat. A songkeeper, a vessel at full power, and it was hungry enough, bold enough to attack directly. The temperature in the grove dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Frost spread across the ancient stones, and the wolves in the outer circle started to scream as the silence reached for them, trying to sever their bonds, trying to drag them into emptiness. "No!" I thrust my hands outward, and silver light exploded from my palms. The song, Eliana's true song, not the pale imitation I'd managed before, roared out of me with enough force to shake the earth. It was the sound of connection itself, of love and rage and joy and grief all woven together, of a mother's lullaby and a warrior's battle cry and a wolf's howl at the moon. It was every emotion that had ever existed, harmonized into something so powerful that even the silence recoiled. But holding it hurt. Gods, it hurt. I felt like my bones were vibrating apart, like my skin was trying to contain a star. Blood ran from my nose, my ears, the corners of my eyes. The price of channeling divine power through a mortal frame. Stannis's hands found my shoulders, and through our bond, I felt him deliberately taking some of the burden. He couldn't sing the song. He wasn't a vessel, but he could share the pain. His body started to shake, blood dripping from his nose as well, but he didn't let go. "Together," he gritted out. "You're not doing this alone." So I leaned into him, into our bond, and I pushed the song outward with everything I had. Silver light washed over the grove, over the pack, spreading outward in waves that I could feel echoing across the entire territory. Everywhere the light touched, connections rekindled. Frayed bonds strengthened. The land itself seemed to shudder and wake, like a sleeper finally rousing from a nightmare. And the silence retreated. Not far, not permanently, but enough. Back to the edges, back to its patient stalking, no longer bold enough to attack head-on. I let the song fade gradually, and the moment I did, my legs gave out. Stannis caught me, and we collapsed together to the ground, both gasping, both bleeding, both alive. The grove was silent except for our ragged breathing. Then slowly the pack began to react. Some wept, some laughed. Some just stood in shocked silence, processing what they'd witnessed. My father approached cautiously, and when I looked up at him, I saw him flinch at my new silver eyes, but he knelt anyway, his hand hovering over mine uncertainly before finally making contact. "It worked," he said hoarsely. "Iris, it actually worked. I can feel the heaviness that's been suffocating us for years. It's lifting." "It's not over," I managed, my voice still doubled, still strange. "The silence is still out there, still hungry. I drove it back, but I didn't destroy it. It'll return. Then we'll fight it." My father's grip on my hand tightened. Together, as a pack, as we should have from the beginning. "Tell me what you need." I looked at him, at Stannis, at the assembled pack with their restored hope and fragile bonds. And I felt Eliana's perspective merge with my own, saw the bigger picture, understood what needed to happen next. "I need you to help me build something that's never existed before," I said. "Not just a pack, but a network. Other territories, other vessels, if any survived their own pack's fears. We need to create a web of connection strong enough that the silence can never fully break through again." "A conclave," Stannis said, understanding immediately, "of songkeepers and their anchors, across all the territories." "The conclave of harmonies," I agreed. "It'll take years, maybe decades, but it's the only way to ensure this never happens again." My father nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll build. Whatever you need, whatever it takes." He helped me stand, and I swayed for a moment before finding my balance. Everything felt different. My body, my senses, my understanding of the world. But Stannis was there, his silent core, my anchor, and that made it bearable. As the pack began to disperse, murmuring among themselves, making plans, I caught sight of the seer. She stood at the edge of the grove, her ancient face unreadable. For a long moment our eyes met, her clouded ones and my new silver ones. Then she bowed, deeply, in acknowledgement and perhaps apology. I nodded back. I couldn't forgive her fear, but I understood it now. Sometimes being wrong was the hardest truth to face. Part 7. The Cost of Balance. The work began immediately. The first week after the merger, I barely slept. Every moment was spent weaving the broken threads of connection back together, teaching the pack how to maintain their bonds consciously instead of taking them for granted. I walked through the territory with Stannis at my side, touching my hands to dying soil and singing growth back into it. I sat with mothers whose pups had been born listless and helped them forge the emotional connections that should have formed naturally, but had been stifled by the silence's influence. It was exhausting. It was painful, and it was absolutely necessary. But the cost of channeling Ileana's power through my mortal body was becoming more apparent every day. I'd always need less sleep than normal wolves, my enhanced senses making rest difficult. The constant awareness of every emotional thread in my territory meant I was never truly alone, never truly quiet except when I was with Stannis. And the physical toll, the nosebleeds, the tremors, the way my bones ached after particularly intense song, that was just something I'd have to learn to live with. "You're pushing too hard," Stannis told me one night as he found me sitting by the stream, blood dripping from my nose after helping repair the pack bonds of 3 separate families. Iris, you need to rest. I can rest when it's done, I said, but even I could hear the exhaustion in my doubled voice. It's never going to be done. He sat beside me and gently wiped the blood from my face. That's what balance means. Constant vigilance, constant maintenance. You can't do it all at once, and you can't do it all yourself. Watch me. I tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. He took my chin in his hand and made me look at him. You promised me I could tell you when you were going too far. Well, I'm telling you, you're going too far. You're burning yourself out trying to fix 4 years of damage in 4 weeks. It doesn't work that way. I wanted to argue, but looking into his storm cloud eyes, feeling the concern radiating through our bond, I knew he was right. I was operating on the edge of collapse, driven by guilt and responsibility, and the constant pressure of Eliana's urge to fix things now. My voice broke. I failed them for 4 years. I let them suffer because I wasn't here, because I was hiding in the Weald. You were 8 years old when they abandoned you, Stannis interrupted fiercely. 8, Iris. A child. What happened to this pack wasn't your fault. It was theirs, your father's, the Seer's. Every wolf who chose fear over understanding. You don't owe them your life as penance for surviving their cruelty. But no buts. His hands framed my face. You are not responsible for other people's choices. You can help them now, yes. But you can't destroy yourself trying to carry burdens that were never yours to begin with. That's not balance. That's just a different kind of breaking. Eliana's voice whispered in my mind, surprisingly gentle. The Anchor speaks wisdom. We cannot maintain harmony if we ourselves are in chaos. I leaned into Stannis' touch, letting myself truly feel the exhaustion for the first time in weeks. How do you always know what I need to hear? Because I know you, he said simply. Both of you, Iris and Eliana. I see when you're trying to be too human and when you're trying to be too divine. My job is to remind you that you're allowed to be both, messy and imperfect, and still doing your best. I kissed him then, desperate and grateful, and felt our bond pulse with warmth. This was what Moira had never had. An anchor who saw her as a person first and a vessel second. Someone who could share the burden without trying to control or worship or fear. Okay, I whispered against his lips. Okay, I'll rest. But tomorrow we start training others to help, he finished. Your father, the pack healers, anyone with even a trace of empathic ability. You can't be the only one maintaining the bonds. That's too much weight for one person, even one as stubborn as you. It was a good plan. It was the right plan. But it also meant trusting the same wolves who had thrown me away, and that was going to take time. 2 months after the merger, scouts from neighboring territories started arriving. Word had spread. There was a functional vessel in Stoneclaw, and the land was healing. Packs that had lost their own vessels to fear or accident, or the silence itself, came seeking help, seeking knowledge, seeking hope. Some came with genuine need. Others came with suspicion, worried that a vessel at full power might be a threat. A few came with outright hostility, determined to eliminate what they saw as the existential danger before I could become another shattered queen. Those were the difficult ones. You need to understand, I told a delegation from the Ravencrest pack, their alpha flanked by warriors whose hands never strayed far from their weapons. I'm not interested in conquest. I'm not interested in forcing other packs to accept me. But the Silence doesn't care about pack borders or territorial disputes. It's spreading, and without vessels to maintain the balance, entire territories will fall into the stillness. What happened here will happen everywhere. So we should just trust you? The Ravencrest Alpha, a hard-eyed woman named Senna, sneered. Put our faith in someone who could destroy us all with a song? You should trust reality, Stannis said coldly from beside me. He'd become increasingly protective as my fame, or infamy, spread. Your scouts reported the same symptoms in your territory. Failing crops, listless pups, bonds that feel hollow. Those aren't coincidences. That's the silence feeding, and it will only get worse. We could just kill you, one of Senna's warriors said bluntly, looking at me. Remove the threat permanently. I felt Stannis tense, felt my father and his warriors shift into defensive positions, but I raised a hand stopping them. Instead, I looked at the warrior, a young man, maybe 19, with eyes full of the same fear my pack had once held, and I let my empathy reach out gently. He was terrified, absolutely terrified, not of me specifically, but of loss of control, of forces he couldn't fight. His mother had been a vessel candidate, born with weak empathic abilities, and she'd been eliminated when he was a child. He'd been taught his entire life that vessels were existential threats. You could try to kill me, I said quietly. You might even succeed. I'm not invincible. But here's what would happen. The moment I died, every bond I've been maintaining would snap. The silence, which has been pushed to the edges of this territory, would rush back in like a flood. Everyone here would be consumed by the stillness within days. And then, it would spread to your territory, feeding on your fear, your distrust, your willingness to murder, rather than understand. I took a step forward, and to his credit, the young warrior didn't retreat. Your mother was a vessel candidate, I said, and I watched his eyes widen in shock. I can feel it in you, the genetic echo, the capacity for empathy you've been suppressing your entire life because you were taught it was weakness. They killed her because they were afraid, and that fear has shaped you into someone who thinks murder is prevention. But it's not. It's just another kind of loss. How did you... His voice cracked. How could you possibly know? Because I can hear it, I said simply. In your soul's song, in the shape of your grief. Your mother's death wasn't necessary. It was fear masquerading as safety, just like my abandonment was, just like every vessel who's been killed or exiled or isolated has been. And we can keep repeating this cycle, or we can try something different. Senna was watching me with new calculation in her eyes. What are you proposing? The conclave of harmonies, I said, turning to address her directly. A network of vessels and their anchors across all territories, sharing knowledge, resources, support, learning from each other's mistakes, building something that can stand against the silence permanently. And who leads this conclave? Senna's tone was suspicious. You? No one leads it, Stannis said. That's the point. It's a cooperative, not a hierarchy. Every vessel maintains their own territory, helps their own pack. But we share information, we support each other, and we make damn sure that no vessel ever has to face what Iris faced, or what Moira faced before her. Pretty words, Senna said. But I've seen what happens when empaths gather. The emotional feedback, the competition for dominance. I can teach them to shield, I interrupted. The way I learned in the Weald, the way Ileana taught me. It's possible to gather without overwhelming each other, but it requires training and discipline and trust. Senna studied me for a long moment. Then she sighed. I'll bring your proposal to my pack. But Vessel, If this turns out to be some elaborate scheme for conquest, if you try to use your power to control us, I will personally put you down. Understood?" "Understood," I said, "and appreciated. We need people willing to ask hard questions and demand accountability. That's how we avoid repeating the mistakes of the past." They left without incident, and I felt my father release a breath he'd been holding. That could have gone much worse. "It's not over," I said tiredly. "It's never going to be over. This is the work now, negotiating, explaining, proving over and over that I'm not a threat. It's exhausting. But necessary," Stannis said, taking my hand. "You're building something unprecedented, Iris. That doesn't happen overnight." "I know." I leaned against him, drawing on his silent strength. "I just wish—" "What?" "I wish I could have been just a girl for a little while longer," I admitted, "before becoming a goddess and a symbol, and whatever else they need me to be." He kissed the top of my head. "You're still just Iris to me, no matter how silver your eyes get." It was a lie, and we both knew it. I would never be just Iris again. But it was a kind lie, and I loved him for offering it. Part 8. The Spreading Dawn. 3 years after the merger, the Conclave of Harmonies held its first official gathering. 17 vessels attended, along with their anchors and representatives from over 40 packs. Some vessels were like me, young, recently merged, still learning to balance human and divine. Others were older, having survived years of isolation before we found them. A few were barely holding on, their territories too far gone, their own grip on sanity fraying from constant battle with the silence. We saved who we could. We mourned those we couldn't. The gathering took place in neutral territory, a place where pack borders met, and no single group could claim dominance. We'd built a great lodge specifically for this purpose, its walls carved with symbols from every tradition, its hearth big enough to warm 300 souls. I stood at the center, flanked by Stannis and my father, an unlikely trio, bound by blood and choice and shared purpose. And I looked at the assembled vessels, these survivors, these warriors, these frightened, powerful, desperately hopeful souls, and I felt Eliana's satisfaction blend with my own pride. "We exist," I said simply, letting my voice carry to every corner of the lodge. "That's the miracle. For centuries, vessels have been isolated, feared, destroyed. But we're here, together. Proof that another way is possible." A vessel named Marcus, 43 years old, scarred from battles both physical and mental, spoke up. "What happens when one of us fails? When the silence breaks through? Do we just watch them fall?" "No," Stannis answered before I could. "That's what the anchor system is for. When one vessel is overwhelmed, others can help share the burden temporarily. It's not perfect, but it's better than facing it alone." "And if a vessel goes rogue?" This from a younger woman, maybe 20, her eyes haunted. "If the power corrupts them? If they start using it to control instead of connect?" "Then we stop them," I said bluntly. "Together. The same way we'd stop any threat to the balance. This isn't about protecting vessels at all costs. It's about protecting the balance itself. That includes from ourselves if necessary." The discussions went long into the night. We argued about ethics, about boundaries, about how to handle packs that still wanted to eliminate vessels, rather than work with them. We shared techniques for shielding, for channeling power safely, for maintaining our own sanity under impossible pressure. And slowly, painfully, we built something that had never existed before. A community of vessels who refused to break alone. By the time the gathering ended a week later, we'd established protocols, communication networks, emergency support systems. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As the vessels departed, returning to their territories and their endless work, Stannis found me standing on the lodge's balcony, watching the sun rise over the forest. "You did it," he said quietly. "What you set out to do 3 years ago. You built the foundation for lasting change." "We did it," I corrected. "I couldn't have survived this long without you." "True." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I leaned into his warmth. "But you were the one brave enough to try. I just held on." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the light spread across the land. The territory below us was thriving now, green and rich and full of life. The bonds between packs were stronger than they'd been in generations. The silence still lurked at the edges, always hungry, always patient. But it couldn't break through anymore. Not with so many vessels working in concert. "I have something to tell you," I said finally, my heart racing. Should I be worried? His tone was light, but I felt his attention sharpen through our bond. "I'm pregnant." He went completely still behind me. Then he spun me around, his eyes wide. We're... Words failed him, but his joy exploded through our bond so intensely it made me laugh. "We're," I confirmed. "About 3 months. I wasn't sure how to tell you, with everything that's been happening." He kissed me, deep and thorough and full of wonder. "A baby," he breathed when we finally broke apart. "Our baby. Iris, this is..." His expression shifted as reality set in. "Wait. Will they be... a vessel?" I finished. "Probably. The trait runs strong in my line, and with both of us carrying the genetic markers." I touched my still flat stomach, feeling the tiny spark of life inside. "She'll be powerful, Stannis. More powerful than me, maybe. And she'll grow up in a world where that's not a death sentence." "She?" His smile was radiant. "You already know?" "Aliana knows," I said. "She can sense the soul already forming. And yes, she's a girl. We're having a daughter." He kissed me again, then knelt and pressed his forehead to my stomach. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Your mother is terrifying and brilliant and the strongest person I've ever met. You're very lucky. And I promise, we won't let anyone make you feel like a curse for being powerful." Tears streamed down my face as I ran my fingers through his hair. This moment, this perfect, ordinary, miraculous moment, was what I'd been fighting for all along. The right to build a life, to love, to bring new life into a world that wouldn't destroy it for being different. "What should we name her?" Stannis asked, looking up at me. I thought of the moon goddess inside me, patient and ancient. I thought of the Weald that had saved me, taught me, shaped me. I thought of all the vessels who had come before, who had suffered and died so that we could stand here now. "Arya," I said, "like the constellation, a song made of stars." "Arya?" he repeated, tasting the name. "Perfect." Part 9. The Legacy. 15 years later, I stood in the same sacred grove where I'd merged with Ileana and watched my daughter practice her gift. Arya was tall for 14, with her father's storm-cloud eyes and my silver-streaked dark hair. She moved through the forms I'd taught her, her hands weaving patterns in the air as she learned to shape the song consciously, rather than just feeling it instinctively. She was breathtaking. And terrifying. Because her power dwarfed mine at the same age, perhaps dwarfed mine even now. The genetic lottery of 2 vessel-line parents had created something unprecedented. But unlike me, unlike Moira, unlike every vessel who had come before, Arya had been trained from birth. She'd grown up knowing exactly what she was, surrounded by others like her, taught that her power was a responsibility rather than a curse or a weapon. She'd never known isolation, never known fear of her own nature. Better, I called as she completed a particularly complex weaving. But you're still forcing it. Let the song flow through you. Don't push it. I am letting it flow, Arya protested, her doubled voice. She'd undergone her own merger last year, carrying exasperation. It's just that my flow is apparently a raging river compared to everyone else's gentle stream. Stannis, watching from beside me, laughed. She gets the attitude from you, you know. She gets everything from me, I said fondly, including the burden of being more powerful than is probably wise. And she gets wisdom from both of us, Stannis countered. She'll be fine, Iris. Better than fine. She's growing up in the world you built. It was true. The Conclave of Harmonies was now a permanent institution, with lodges in every major territory. Vessels were still rare, perhaps one born in every 10,000 wolves, but they were no longer destroyed out of fear. They were trained, supported, given the tools to succeed where previous generations had failed. The silence still existed. It always would, a fundamental force of entropy, of disconnection, the shadow side of Eliana's light. But it no longer gained ground. The network of vessels held it at bay, maintaining the balance through constant, careful work. Mom? Arya's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Can I ask you something? Always. She walked over to us, her expression serious. When you first merged with Eliana, were you scared you'd lose yourself? That you'd become something that wasn't you anymore? I considered the question carefully. Yes. Terrified. There were moments during the merger when I couldn't remember my own name, when Eliana's perspective was so vast that my little human concerns seemed insignificant. If your father hadn't been there, if I hadn't had an anchor to call me back, I might have drifted completely into the divine consciousness. Do you still feel that pull? To let go? To just be Eliana? Every day, I admitted. The work is exhausting, and sometimes the idea of just surrendering to the vast, patient eternity of her perspective is tempting. But then I look at your father, at you, at the world we're building together, and I remember why I chose to remain Iris as well as Eliana. Arya nodded slowly. Morvena, the vessel from the Ironwood Pack. She told me she doesn't understand why we bother holding on to our human selves. She said the merger would be easier if we just let the goddess take over completely. I exchanged a glance with Stannis. Morvena was one of the older vessels, powerful but increasingly distant, increasingly inhuman. We'd been watching her carefully, worried about exactly this kind of thinking. Morvena is wrong, I said firmly. The goddesses chose us because they needed human hearts, human connections, human understanding. Pure, divine power without empathy, without love, without messy human emotions. That's just another kind of emptiness. We are meant to be both. That's the entire point. Even when being both is hard? Especially then, Stannis said. The easy path isn't always the right one, Arya. Your mother could have let go of her humanity a long time ago, but she chose to carry both identities because she understood that balance requires tension, requires constant adjustment. You can't have harmony without different notes. Arya smiled, and it was my smile, full of mischief and determination. Good, because I don't particularly want to become a emotionless goddess. I like being messy and human. Then stay messy, I said, pulling her into a hug. Stay human. Stay you. The power is a tool, not a master. Don't let anyone, including the goddesses in our heads, tell you otherwise." She hugged me back fiercely. "Thanks, Mom, for showing me it's possible to be both." As she returned to her practice, Stannis took my hand. "She's going to be amazing, you know. Even more than you are." "I know." I watched our daughter shape light and song with casual grace, and I felt a complex mixture of pride and fear. The world she inherits will be better than the one I was born into, but it will still have challenges, still have shadows. I just hope we've given her enough tools to face them. "You have," he said simply. "Trust her. Trust what we built." I leaned against him, drawing on his silent strength the way I had for 17 years. The soul bond between us had only grown deeper over time, an anchor that kept me tethered through countless storms. "The world sings a trillion songs," I said quietly, repeating words that had become something of a mantra, "of joy and pain, love and loss. It's loud, and it's beautiful, and it's mine to care for." "But not yours alone," Stannis reminded me. "Not anymore. We share the burden now." "We do," I agreed, "and that makes all the difference." Epilogue. The quiet rest. 25 years after I was left in the Weald to die, I stood on the balcony of our home. Not the Pack compound, but a small house we'd built at the territory's edge, where the forest met the mountains and the view stretched for miles. Stannis found me there, as he always did when I needed silence. He didn't speak, just wrapped his arms around me and let his quiet core balance the constant noise of my expanded senses. Below us, Stoneclaw territory thrived. Arya had already begun taking over some of my duties, training younger vessels, maintaining bonds while I stepped back gradually. My father, gray-haired and mellowed by age, had finally retired, passing the alpha position to a younger wolf who understood that power was responsibility, not domination. The Conclave held annual gatherings now, celebrations rather than desperate strategy sessions. The silence still lurked at the edges of civilization, still hungry, still patient. But it no longer gained ground. The balance held. "Tired?" Stannis asked softly. "Always," I admitted. "But it's a good tired. The tired of work that matters." "You've done enough, you know. More than enough. You could step back completely. Let the next generation carry the weight. Maybe someday." I turned in his arms to face him. "But not yet. There's still so much to do. So much to build. Besides, I'm barely 33. I've got time. 33 years old and carrying the weight of the world." He shook his head fondly. "The girl I found in the Weald would barely recognize you." "She's still here," I assured him. "Underneath the silver eyes, and the doubled voice, and the divine consciousness. She's still here, still scared sometimes, still in awe of what we've built together." "Good." He kissed my forehead. "Don't lose her completely. I rather like that frightened, fierce, impossibly brave girl." "She rather likes you too," I said. "In fact, she loves